The stereotype says that people playing video games aren't typically the most patient individuals around, either because of how freely available video games are these days, or because of the sheer variety we have at our disposal. But if you're not enjoying a video game, you don't have to keep playing. It all depends on how bad things get, though. I'll be blunt with you, I really don't like giving up on a game. Maybe it's just my current capacity as someone who talks about video games quite often, or that I've got way too many games in my collection and I've played only a few hours of a piece, but I feel like even the worst games around are worth persevering with, either in the off chance there's a nugget of positivity in here somewhere, or so that you never have to play it again. It's that time-honoured dilemma. And yet I've often found that I've stopped playing a game because of moments that have been something other than stupidly hard. In making this video and thinking back to my past experiences with certain video games, I've taken a break for a load of different reasons, ranging from an important character dying out of nowhere, to the game doing something unbelievably stupid that I can't be bothered with right now. So I think I'll talk about the most interesting ones, because I think 15 minutes of me saying that video games are hard might get tedious. I've got enough of that to deal with, thanks. You might get the impression from the title and the nature of this video that I'll probably be spending most of the time talking about frustrating moments from games I don't really like, and that would certainly make for an easier video. But I've stopped playing video games for other reasons, you know? Certainly I've taken breaks from some of my favourite games because of a section that confused me, because I played most of my all-time favourites as a kid, and I was a fucking idiot as a child. So much has changed since then. But when I was 7, I remember getting stuck on Legend of Zelda Wind Waker in a few different areas. I couldn't get to grips with the stealth required to get through the Forsaken Fortress the first time. This second rope-swinging minigame took me an age to beat because I didn't know that you could change direction while on a rope. But while there's every chance that no one else struggled with these exact moments as well, I'm fairly certain that most people had problems at a certain point in this game. I used to find myself defending Wind Waker quite regularly, but over the years, the world has warmed to the game's little quirks, and now the graphics and the slightly empty overworld aren't hated as much. Though, you would need quite a convincing argument to convince people that the Triforce hunt was fun. Because it kind of isn't. But actually, some of those points work well together if you've got the right mindset. Having a huge overworld works if the game encourages you to explore it, since there's every chance that you'll stumble across something exciting. Wind Waker falls down at this juncture because the linearity in the game is rarely lifted before the Triforce hunt. So if you sail to somewhere off the beaten path, you'll likely find an island that you can't fully explore until later. Later comes in the form of the Triforce hunt, which is where Wind Waker relaxes its vice-like grip on the player and lets them roam free to visit whatever corner of the Great Sea they want, but mostly to pick up these very well-hidden lumps of Triforce, which you can only find by deciphering the well-hidden charts for nearly 400 rupees a pop. I personally stopped playing at this point for quite a long time as a kid because of the sheer amount of effort it took to gain one chunk of Triforce without a guide. The drawback to Wind Waker becoming more open world at this point is that the game's pacing takes a spectacular nosedive and you're left pumping hours into the game for very little progress. But it didn't put me off the game forever. I came back eventually, albeit with a guide this time, and got to the end of my favourite Zelda game of the lot. It's long, but honestly not that bad. Hey, Wind Waker HD made some adjustments, and it's pretty fun now. Tingle still charges 398 rupees to decipher them though, so it's good to see that some things never change. We're starting to get to that time of the year where gaming publications and YouTube channels are starting to talk about their favourite and least favourite games of the year, and don't worry, I'm gradually working through a very large pile of video games that I want to play before the end of the year. But it's also where you kind of have to explain how a game is bad, because it sometimes isn't all that obvious. Like most people, my experience of No Man's Sky wasn't particularly straightforward. The benefit of hindsight will tell you to maybe temper your expectations of a game as open-ended and as unpredictable as this, but that didn't stop the hype train reaching its dizzying top speed shortly before it came out in August last year, only for a tremendous derailment with very few survivors. It is an extremely boring game to play, and I still stand by the claim that it is the worst game I played last year, because even with video games that are worse from a technical standpoint, you revel in their failures and reach that coveted so bad it's good, or at least somewhat entertaining zone. At the time, No Man's Sky felt like a chore with very few redeemable qualities. Within the last year or so, they've updated it so it's got more of a structure these days, but it wasn't like that when I played it. Hey, it was good for like 2 hours. Then it got bad. Helpfully, I remember the exact moment when I realized that No Man's Sky wasn't quite the game I wanted it to be. Shortly after you learn about hyperdrives and being able to make slightly larger jumps across the universe, you realize that in order to keep doing this, you need a whole load of warp cells which require their own crafting ingredients and subsequently a hefty amount of grinding. So you cynically wander from planet to planet, not giving a shit about the procedurally generated wildlife and picking up whatever carbon and iridium you can get your hands on. It's at roughly this point that I looked ahead to my future prospects within this game and thought, nah, I'm alright thanks. Every game has a flowchart that the player is loosely following while playing it, and in No Man's Sky you're grinding for materials to build warp cells to power your hyperdrive to reach the center of the universe, and then what? What are you hoping for at the end of this? What amazingly great thing is at the center of the universe which justifies all of this tremendous bullshit? Nothing would be worth going through this monotony. I haven't been back since. Having multiple playstyles in a game always concerns me at least a little bit. I'm not talking about games where you've got an option of how you control it, like using motion controls or a pro controller in ARMS. I'm referring to any game where there's one basic form of gameplay used as a foundation for a load of other extra features and mini-games. The problem is that this sometimes overcomplicates things, and you'll find that a game can do one thing really well with, say, the driving portions being let down by sloppy controls. I remember Watch Dogs had this issue, among many, mind you. But every time you get in a car in that game, it's like your blood is 90% alcohol for some reason. It's kind of a problem when you're driving cars so often. But Grand Theft Auto seems to know what it's doing in this department. In fact, across the franchise's history, you've been in charge of a huge selection of vehicles with controls that don't feel like they were designed by an obtuse arsehole. Maybe that's why I hate the Demolition Man mission from Vice City, and not just because it almost rhymes. It's actually because the rest of the game is designed with an air of sympathy for the player who'll be controlling a bunch of different vehicles. But for some reason, this didn't carry over to a stupid remote-controlled helicopter. I mean, this game has helicopters in it that react with the right kind of floatiness that you'd expect, but why is a toy version of the same thing so much harder to control? You're supposed to be using the RC helicopter to lay explosives at various points on this construction site, taking special care to avoid the many construction workers and armed security who try to destroy your helicopter, and all with this annoying time limit jabbing you in the back of the head. There are ways of making it easier, like killing the guards first, since the time limit doesn't start until you pick up the first bomb, but this whole mission is arbitrarily difficult and wholly unnecessary in a game where you never use these specific skills again. I quit after failing one too many times because I hated that Vice City had this random mission in it that requires intense precision from the player after so much video game that was fairly lax in this area. Also, I don't really want to point it out, but you could probably do the same job with a bit of stealth and a character using their legs to move, but helicopters got a helicopter, yo. Because that's fun, I think. I agree that given enough time you'll be able to learn the controls required to be able to maneuver an RC helicopter up 4 flights of construction sites. But Vice City was also released on mobile devices. Why the hell not, I thought to myself, it could be fun. You try and control an RC helicopter with 2 thumbs, and then get back to me on how fun this mission is. You know, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. I think it's important to mention from time to time that I've stopped playing video games for reasons other than the gameplay getting kind of stupid. I did mention this at the start, but it's good to reinforce the issue when it becomes relevant. Let's face it, there are other factors that contribute to how much fun you're going to get out of a video game, and on a number of occasions it's been the narrative that's turned me away instead of some shaky difficulty curve. The majority of the time when this happens, it'll be an RPG that takes an age to get going and spends so long setting the scene and establishing characters that I yearn for something tangible to sink my teeth into and go play literally anything else. Conversely, I stuck by Bravely Default long enough for the characters to become interesting and the gameplay to fill in any cracks in the story, and yet I've still taken 3 years and counting to finish it. Just how badly do you have to drop the ball to achieve something like that? I've talked about this fairly recently, so I'll keep it brief, but Bravely Default commits the cardinal sin of dwelling too long in a moment to try to prove a point. There comes a point where you've beaten all of the bosses and prayed in front of all of the crystals in hope of restoring the world to its former glory or something, and you're instead taken to a parallel universe where more bosses need defeating and more crystals need prayers, and it might have been fun if it was played for laughs or greatly shortened so the player only sees the cut down highlights, but the reality is that you get to chapter 5 of one of the most enjoyable RPGs of the last decade, only to repeat the same events for the next 3 chapters. Of course I stopped playing, because I like to think I can find something better to do with my time. Apparently so can the guy who was writing IGN's walkthrough of Bravely Default, because it gets to chapter 5 and it's like, nah, I'm good guys. I never thought IGN would be so relatable. So this shouldn't surprise anyone, right? Trust me when I say that I choose video topics for the poll almost entirely at random based on user suggestions. And even then you've got loads of people voting on what they want to see, so the fact that I'm talking about something that suits Spec Ops The Line down to the ground is largely coincidental. It also plays into the idea of not continuing with a video game for a reason other than frustration, since Spec Ops The Line isn't particularly hard to play, but it sure is hard to finish. You know, like every good game is supposed to be. Spec Ops' main theme is control, and it goes further than Captain Walker and his crew trying to work out what's going on in a sandstorm-disrupted Dubai. What initially plays like a paint-by-numbers over-the-shoulder shooter, where you naturally assume that everything you're shooting is out to get you because you're the good guy with no information to tell you otherwise, takes an almighty turn for the worse in one of the most harrowing scenes I've ever seen in a video game. In a direct commentary on the choiceless actions of other shooters, where you follow what the game tells you to do and lead your character to victory in the end, the white phosphorus scene sees you follow what the game tells you to do and dump tons of weaponized fire on a group of innocent soldiers and civilians. I often hear this sequence criticized for scolding the player despite not presenting them with a choice, but that is missing the point entirely. The purpose is to see how much criticism and damnation a player can take and to see if they care about it. Because a normal person would probably stop at some point. I know I did. The thing is that I stopped immediately after the white phosphorus scene. I've played my fair amount of shooters and even a number of games where you're explicitly playing as the bad guy, but the manner in which Spec Ops The Line swiftly sweeps the rug out from underneath you is something I just couldn't get my head around at the time. It's the fact that you dump white phosphorus on a group of people, have a cutscene that shows the direct result of your actions with a heavy amount of criticism thrown your way, but the game continues as normal. I've done genuinely terrible things in video games before, but usually they've had little to no consequences, or at least have triggered a bad ending I can bounce back from. Spec Ops The Line asks you to consider what it means to blow people up, with the game providing you very little context other than assuming that the video game itself wouldn't steer you wrong. You never had any control over what you were doing, but you could have just stopped. This has been RabbidLuigi, and despite stopping after the white phosphorus scene, I still came back, mainly because I was under the assumption that Spec Ops The Line would be using this scene as a means to an end, but no. There are very few games out there that treat their genre in such a way, knowing that people will keep playing because that's what usually happens in shooters. You commit horrendous atrocities, but you get to a positive end at the end, right? Spec Ops The Line. The only winning move is not to play. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn to a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.